The 12 powerful titans of Greek mythology. Themis, Titaness of Divine Law and Order. Chapter 1. Born of earth and sky in the time before men named the constellations. Before cities carved their laws into stone, there was only the raw majesty of creation. The heavens stretched vast and unbroken. The earth heaved with restless life, and from the union of these two eternal powers came the race of Titans. They were beings of incomprehensible might, each embodying a force of the cosmos. Storm, light, ocean, fire. Among them was born Themis, daughter of Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky. From the first breath of her existence, Themis was unlike her siblings. Oceanus surged with endless waters. Hyperion burned with radiant light. Cronus sharpened his hunger for dominion. Yet Themis was quiet, steady, and profound. She carried not the roar of thunder, nor the blaze of flame, but the silent weight of order itself, an unseen law that bound the universe together. When she opened her eyes for the first time, the stars above found their rhythm. When she placed her hand upon the ground, the seas learned their tides. She was not chaos, but cadence, not power without limit, but power within measure. Even as an infant among gods, the other titans felt her presence as one feels gravity, constant, inescapable, defining. Her mother, Gaia, looked upon her with pride, for Themis embodied the fairness of the earth itself, giving, nurturing, but never to be defiled without consequence. Uranus, the sky, felt unease. In his boundless reign, he tolerated no law above his own. Yet Themis's very existence was a reminder that even the infinite sky must bow to balance. Among her siblings, Themis grew in quiet majesty. She did not contest them in strength, nor challenge them in ambition. But when disputes arose, and they often did, for the Titans were proud and unyielding, it was Themis who calmed the storm. Her voice, soft yet unbreakable, cut through their arguments. She spoke not as one demanding obedience, but as one revealing inevitability. What is broken must be mended. What is sworn must be honored. Even gods cannot escape the weight of consequence. Thus was Themis's nature revealed. She was not merely a Titaness, but the very embodiment of cosmic justice. She was the law that underpinned creation, not imposed from without, but woven into the fabric of being. To defy her was not simply to rebel against a goddess. It was to defy the order that allowed existence to endure. As the world shaped itself, mortals began to stir upon the earth. Fragile, fleeting, and uncertain, they lived by instinct alone. Yet Themis watched them with quiet compassion. She knew that without guidance, their lives would fall to chaos, their bonds dissolve in mistrust. So she descended among them, not with thunder or flame, but with the gift of order. She taught them the sanctity of oaths, the sacred duty between guest and host, the reverence for truth spoken before fire and sky. In their camps and villages, she became a presence unseen yet always felt. When a stranger was welcomed with bread, it was Themis who smiled. When a vow was kept despite hardship, it was Themis who listened. Though mortals did not know her name, they felt her presence whenever harmony triumphed over discord, whenever justice was honored above strength. In this way, Themis's story began not with conquest, but with balance. She did not overthrow or destroy. She shaped and tempered. Where other Titans carved their power into the world with violence, Themis wove hers into its very structure. She was the measure of sea and star, of promise and oath, of cause and consequence. And though the age of strife lay ahead, the fall of Uranus, the rise of Cronus, the war of Titans and Olympians, Themis's path was already clear. She would not be the wielder of sickles or thunderbolts. She would be something greater, the eternal law that no crown could escape, the harmony that even gods must heed. Thus was Themis born, daughter of earth and sky, sister of Titans, and keeper of the balance by which all things endure. Chapter 2. Keeper of cosmic order. From her earliest days, Themis was not a goddess of thunder or fire, but of balance. Her power was not seen in the clash of weapons, but in the stillness that followed storms. When her siblings fought for dominion, her role was to remind them that strength alone could not sustain the cosmos. Themis's presence was like an unseen boundary in the world. Oceanus roared, pouring his waters across the earth. But Themis gave him limits, shores and tides that returned him to the sea. Hyperion blazed with unquenchable light, but Themis ordained the rhythm of dawn and dusk. Selene carried the silver moon across the sky, yet Themis traced her path with steady hands. Even the wild stars found their courses under her guidance, forming constellations that marked the heavens with order. Though her power was subtle, it was absolute, for without measure, even gods would falter. Where chaos sought to spill unchecked, Themis wove boundaries. Where ambition threatened to consume, she planted restraint. She was not a warrior, but every battle was shaped by her unseen hand. Not a ruler, yet every throne rested on her foundation. In the councils of the Titans, Themis's voice was a rare anchor. When Cronus plotted against Uranus, his words were filled with hunger for liberation and power. The hall of the Titans shook with excitement, for many longed to break free from Uranus's oppressive reign. Yet Themis rose, calm and resolute. "Change is a river," she said. "It carries life forward, but without banks, it floods and destroys. If you strike down the sky, you must shape what follows. Without law, a crown is only a chain that shifts from one neck to another." Her warning was not ignored, though it was not always heeded. Cronus, fierce and determined, took her words into himself, though in time he would twist them to his own design. Still, even in his ambition, he could not wholly forget Themis's counsel, that power must be bound, or else it devours itself. Themis was more than a voice in the Hall of Titans. She was also a teacher to mortals. In their fragile, wandering lives, humans knew only hunger and fear. They stole from one another, fought among themselves, and gave no weight to promises. Seeing this, Themis walked among them unseen, planting the first seeds of order in their hearts. She taught them the sacred duty of hospitality, that a stranger at one's fire was to be treated as kin, for the gods themselves might walk the earth in mortal guise. She bound them to oaths, teaching that a vow once spoken was not mere breath, but a thread woven into the fabric of existence. She impressed upon them the importance of justice, that the strong must not consume the weak without consequence. Though mortals did not yet know her name, they felt her hand in their lives. When a tribe honored its word, when an enemy was spared in mercy, when a guest was welcomed with bread and fire, Themis was there. She became the silent guardian of human harmony, invisible yet eternal. Among the gods, her role was no less vital. Titans often quarreled, their pride vast as mountains. Yet when they gathered in assembly, Themis's words held sway, not because she wielded threat, but because her truth was undeniable. Even the proudest Titan could not wholly defy her, for to ignore Themis was to invite chaos that none could endure. Her wisdom shaped the earliest structure of divine society. She established the sanctity of oaths among gods, ensuring that promises made were promises binding. She declared that sacred places must remain inviolate, that no violence should spill upon shrines where divine and mortal worlds touched. Through her, the very notion of law became not invention, but revelation, as old as the earth itself, as certain as the rising sun. In time, Themis's gift of order blossomed into prophecy. For what is prophecy, if not the reading of law upon time itself? She could see the strands of consequence stretching forward, the ripples of each action echoing into the future. Unlike other prophets, who spoke in riddles and visions, Themis understood the deeper structure, cause and effect, bound like chain to chain. To hear her counsel was to glimpse not fate as an arbitrary decree, but destiny as the inevitable unfolding of law. Thus Themis became the first great oracle. She spoke to gods and mortals alike, not as a voice of doom, but as a guide. Her words taught that the future was not random, but shaped by choices. She warned that oaths broken would bring ruin, that hubris would topple empires, that mercy, too, had its reward. In her vision, justice was not merely punishment, it was balance, a harmony that could be preserved if one had the wisdom to act rightly. In the age before temples and courts, Themis was already the beating heart of law. Her role was not to conquer or destroy, but to sustain. Where her siblings carved their names in fire and stone, Themis carved hers into the invisible order of the world. And though the world would soon tremble with rebellion, war, and the fall of kings, Themis's law would remain unshaken and eternal. For no matter how high gods may climb, nor how far mortals may fall, all are bound by the same truth, that without justice, the world itself cannot stand. And Themis, silent and steadfast, was that truth made flesh. Chapter 3. The Voice of Prophecy. Themis had long been known as the keeper of divine order, yet with time her gift deepened into something greater, the gift of prophecy. Unlike seers who glimpsed fragmented visions, Themis did not guess at shadows. She read the fabric of existence itself, as though the future were a scroll written in the same ink as law. Her voice was calm, yet it carried weight beyond thunder. For when Themis spoke, she was not offering counsel, but unveiling the hidden logic of the cosmos. Her prophecies were not born of frenzy or dream, but of perfect clarity, the recognition that every choice rippled outward into eternity. It was in the sacred groves, where the wind stirred the leaves into whispers, that she first became known as an oracle. The Titans, restless with ambition and fear, came to her seeking certainty. Would Cronus prevail against Uranus? Would his reign endure? What would be the fate of their children? To Cronus she spoke, "Your blade will break the sky, and from its wound a storm will be born. You will hold the crown, but not forever. For every child devours the shadow of its father, and your shadow will be long." Cronus heard and dismissed the warning, believing strength could bend fate. Yet her words haunted him, dripping like water upon stone, until paranoia gnawed his soul. It was Themis's prophecy that drove him to swallow his children, seeking to outwit the law of succession. But fate is not so easily deceived, and in time Zeus would rise. Themis's role as oracle spread beyond the Titans. Even mortals, trembling in their fragility, sought her counsel. In return, Themis's voice reached them in dreams and visions, guiding their tribes with laws they could scarcely have imagined on their own. "Honor the guest, for the road belongs to all," she told them. "Keep your oaths, for a broken word unravels the world. Do not lift your hand without cause, for violence without justice brings its own ruin." Thus, through prophecy, Themis wove morality into the very bones of humankind. She was not worshipped with thunderous rituals, but with quiet reverence, for her wisdom lived in the laws of life itself. Yet prophecy is a heavy gift, even for a Titaness. To see the future is to see sorrow that cannot be prevented. Themis foresaw wars that would drown generations, betrayals that would fracture families, and the downfall of those she cherished most. She knew the fate of the Titans long before the first spear was raised. When the Titanomachy loomed, that great war between Titans and Olympians, Themis stood apart. Her siblings urged her to choose a side, but she knew already how the war would end. She had seen the children of Cronus rise, led by Zeus, and she had seen their triumph. To fight against them would be to fight against inevitability. So Themis, unlike many of her kin, did not take up arms. Instead, she prepared for what would follow. She foresaw that when the smoke of war cleared, a new order would emerge. Not a world ruled by brute force, but one where law and justice would be needed more than ever. It was for this reason that Themis allied herself with Zeus, not out of submission, but out of recognition. For in Zeus's rise, she saw the fulfillment of her own prophecy, and in his reign, she saw the need for her wisdom. Thus, Themis became counselor to the new king of the gods, not as servant, but as equal, guiding Olympus with the same balance she had once given to the Titans. Her voice shaped the very foundation of divine law. She established the assembly of the gods, where no one deity could act without the counsel of others. She taught Zeus the sacred duty of hospitality, which he would guard as one of his highest laws. She stood at his side during councils, her presence ensuring that the rule of Olympus was not mere tyranny, but bound by justice. Mortals, too, felt her influence more deeply than ever. Themis's oracles gave rise to sanctuaries, where priests and priestesses channeled her voice. The most sacred of these was the oracle at Delphi, which, though later claimed by Apollo, was first her domain. There, upon the stone of the earth's navel, her voice once flowed like a river, declaring truths that shook kings and humbled empires. But prophecy was not without cost. Themis carried the burden of inevitability, knowing that law could restrain but never erase suffering. She saw the rise of heroes, but also their tragic falls. She foresaw the wrath of gods, but also the folly of mortals who would defy them. She knew that even Olympus itself, glittering in victory, would one day tremble, and yet she endured. For to see the truth and speak it is not weakness, but the greatest strength. Themis did not despair in the face of fate. She embraced it, shaping its course where she could, guiding others to walk in balance with the laws of the universe. Thus she became not only the Titaness of law, but the eternal voice of prophecy, a beacon for gods and mortals alike. Her presence reminded all that no throne, however mighty, could stand without justice. And though time would pass, and new gods would claim her temples, the whisper of Themis would never fade. For as long as men and gods sought truth, they would find her voice in the stillness, in the harmony of law, in the quiet certainty of balance. Chapter 4. The Mother of Seasons. Themis, ever the guardian of balance, carried within her a gift greater than prophecy alone, the gift of life that mirrored the harmony of the cosmos. Through her union with Zeus, she became the mother of divine daughters, each embodying an aspect of universal order. Among them were the Horai, the seasons, who brought rhythm and harmony to the world of gods and mortals. The Horai were not simply keepers of time. They were the very embodiment of life's cycles, the turning of the world's great wheel. Eunomia, the spirit of order, governed human society, ensuring justice prevailed among kings and mortals. Dike, the spirit of justice, watched over humanity with stern but fair eyes, rewarding righteousness and punishing corruption. Irin, the spirit of peace, wove tranquility across the lands, calming storms both of nature and of war. To Themis, these daughters were not merely children, but extensions of her essence, living laws, walking embodiments of balance. Each Horai carried forth her wisdom, planting seeds of order and growth wherever they walked. The world, before their birth, was chaotic. Mortals sowed without knowing the right season, kings ruled without restraint, and even the weather seemed to lash out in fury. But as the Horai took their place beside their mother, the earth shifted into harmony. Spring burst forth at Irin's gentle touch, fields blossoming with abundance. Summer's warmth came in the wake of Eunomia, granting order to harvests and the rhythms of labor. Autumn, guided by Dike, reminded humankind of justice, that what was sown must also be reaped. And winter, though silent and cold, was not cruel, but a season of rest, preparing the cycle to begin anew. Thus, the Horai brought not just time, but meaning to time. Each season became sacred, a reflection of Themis's eternal law that nothing exists without balance, that life must follow death, and order must follow chaos. The gods themselves marveled at this gift. Even mighty Zeus looked upon Themis with reverence, acknowledging that her wisdom gave structure to his reign. "Without you," he said, "my lightning would strike without reason, and Olympus would be a throne of storms. But through your children, the world turns in harmony, and my rule stands upon firm ground." Mortals, too, celebrated the Horai. They raised festivals for each season, offering the first fruits of spring, the golden grain of summer, the rich wine of autumn, and even the humble hearth fire of winter. In honoring the Horai, they honored Themis, whose presence was felt in every rhythm of life. But Themis was more than a mother. She was a teacher. She guided her daughters in their sacred roles, reminding them always of the balance between mercy and justice, between generosity and discipline. Her voice was the compass by which the Horai governed not only nature, but the hearts of humankind. Yet even in this harmony, Themis foresaw shadows, for she knew that mortals, though blessed with the guidance of the Horai, would stray. There would come ages when kings defied Eunomia, spreading corruption, times when Dike's scales would be shattered by greed and war, moments when peace, guarded by Irin, would be forgotten in the madness of conquest. Still, Themis did not despair. She knew that though mortals might falter, the cycle of the seasons would endure. The earth would always turn, and with each turn there was renewal. For every broken law, another would rise. For every war, peace would follow. Themis's law was eternal, written not in words, but in the heartbeat of creation itself. And so, in the groves where her altars stood, mortals whispered prayers to Themis and her daughters. When they planted seeds, they asked Eunomia for guidance. When disputes raged, they begged for Dike's justice. When famine or war threatened, They called upon Erin for peace, and always, in the stillness between their prayers, they felt the quiet presence of Themis, the eternal mother, the silent guardian of balance. Thus, through the Horai, Themis became not only the Titaness of divine law, but the mother of civilization itself. For without the rhythm of the seasons, without the harmony of justice and peace, mankind could not thrive. Her gift was more than prophecy. It was life, shaped into order and carried through time. And so, Olympus and Earth alike moved in harmony with Themis's law, each cycle of the seasons echoing her eternal truth, that in balance there is life everlasting. Chapter 6, Themis and the Moirai in the silent chambers beyond Olympus, where shadows mingled with threads of starlight. 3 figures bent over a great loom. Their fingers spun, measured, and cut, and with each motion, lives were born, lived, and ended. These were the Moirai, the Fates, Clotho, the spinner, Lachesis, the allotter, and Atropos, the cutter. Even gods bowed before them, for none could escape the tapestry they wove. But though the Fates spun the threads of destiny, it was Themis who gave them their law. Themis was often seen in their halls, her presence as calm as the rhythm of the loom. The Moirai did not treat her as they did other gods, with cryptic silence or distant coldness. Instead, they welcomed her as a sister in eternal purpose, for she was the guardian of order, and their work was the heartbeat of that order. Clotho, spinning her threads of life, once asked her, "Lady Themis, why must I spin the threads of both kings and beggars alike? Why not only the noble and the just?" Themis replied gently, "Because the law is not for one, but for all. The humblest thread strengthens the tapestry as much as the golden one. Without the small, the great cannot endure." Lachesis, who measured the thread of each life, questioned her, "Why must I grant long years to the cruel and short ones to the kind? Would not justice demand otherwise?" Themis answered, "Justice is not measured by years, but by balance. The cruel may live long to face their own deeds, while the kind may live briefly, yet leave a legacy eternal. All is balanced in ways mortals cannot see." Atropos, the sternest, who cut the thread with her shears, once murmured, "And when I end a life too soon, do I not defy law?" Themis placed her hand upon Atropos's shoulder. "You cannot defy law, for you are its servant. Endings, whether gentle or sudden, are not chaos, but necessity. Without endings, beginnings lose their meaning." Thus, the Moirai trusted Themis as their interpreter, the voice that explained their silent work to gods and mortals alike. Even Zeus himself, though king of gods, could not command the Moirai. He might plead, he might rage, but he could not alter their weaving. Yet when Themis spoke of their will, even Zeus bowed his head, for he knew her words carried the truth of eternity. It was said that once, during a great assembly of the gods, Zeus grew wrathful at a prophecy that foretold his eventual downfall. "I am king of Olympus," he thundered. "No fate shall unseat me." Themis rose calmly, her eyes shining with the quiet certainty of law. Even the thunder must answer to the storm. Even Olympus must bow to the loom. You reign because it is your time. When your time ends, it will not be theft, but fulfillment. The Moirai do not steal crowns. They pass them from hand to hand. As the seasons pass one into another, the gods fell silent. Zeus, though angered, said no more, for he knew her words were beyond challenge. Mortals, too, felt the Moirai's presence, but could not understand their work. They built temples and shrines, offering sacrifices to alter their fates, to stretch the thread of life, or to avert an untimely cut. But Themis taught priests and seers to tell the truth. You cannot bribe the Moirai, for they are deaf to offerings. You can only live with dignity, walking the thread they grant you. That is the law. Through her guidance, humanity learned acceptance of destiny. The farmer who lost his crops, the mother who lost her child, the king who lost his throne, all were reminded that such losses were not punishment, but part of the eternal design. Pain was heavy, yet it was not meaningless. It was woven into the larger fabric of existence. Themis herself often gazed upon the tapestry of fate, her eyes seeing patterns invisible to others. She did not try to change what she saw, for she knew that to resist the weave was to resist creation itself. Instead, she sought to prepare gods and mortals alike, teaching them that wisdom lies not in avoiding destiny, but in embracing it with grace. And so, the bond between Themis and the Moirai endured, a sacred alliance between divine law and divine destiny. Themis was not their master, nor their servant, but their counterpart, the voice that gave meaning to their silence. Together, they formed the deepest truth of the cosmos, that life is measured not by chance, but by law, a law older than gods, older than time, and eternal as the stars. Chapter 7. The Olympian Prophecies. Among the high halls of Olympus, where thunder rolled like a heartbeat, and golden pillars gleamed in eternal light, there was one voice that even Zeus, the king of the gods, awaited in silence. It was not the voice of war, nor the voice of storm, but the steady, unwavering voice of prophecy. It belonged to Themis, the Titaness of Divine Law and Order, whose visions pierced the veil of time. For Themis was not only counselor and mother, she was the prophetess of Olympus, the oracles that mortals whispered of in hushed tones, the visions spoken in Delphi, Dodona, and other sacred sites traced their lineage to her wisdom. She was the root from which all true prophecy grew, the bridge between law and destiny. When the gods quarreled, she spoke of their outcomes before their quarrels even began. When mortals prayed for guidance, her unseen hand shaped the voices of seers who answered in riddles. Where the Moirai wove fate, Themis revealed its pattern, turning silence into understanding. One day, as the council of the gods convened, Zeus demanded that the gods bring order to a growing problem among mortals. Kingdoms had risen and fallen too quickly. Wars had erupted without restraint, and rulers claimed divine favor without earning it. The other Olympians clamored for solutions. Ares called for greater war to cleanse the weak. Athena urged wisdom and diplomacy. Poseidon wanted the seas to swallow cities in punishment. But Themis stood in the center, her eyes clouded with silver light. She raised her hand, and silence fell across Olympus. "Hear me," she said, her voice low, yet echoing across the throne room. "Mortals stumble in darkness because their rulers mistake power for justice. The time will come when a line of kings shall rise, noble in blood and guided by wisdom, but it will not last forever. Even dynasties fall, as do mountains and stars. This is the law of all things." The gods shifted uneasily. Mortals had always looked to Olympus for permanence, for an eternal reflection of divine order. But Themis reminded them that nothing, not even kingdoms, could stand against the cycles of fate. Then Zeus asked, his voice softer than thunder, "And what of Olympus? Will our reign last forever?" A hush gripped the hall. Themis's eyes glimmered, as though reflecting threads unseen. You will rule as long as you honor law. But when pride blinds you, and when strife consumes your children, even Olympus shall tremble. Do not think yourselves beyond the order that binds all creation. A murmur of unease rippled through the gods. Hera clenched her fists in quiet defiance. Poseidon scowled, unwilling to hear such words. Yet Zeus, though anger burned in him, bowed his head, for he knew that Themis spoke not opinion, but truth. Themis's prophecies spread beyond Olympus as well. Mortals flocked to sacred groves and oracles, seeking answers in their uncertainty. They did not know it was Themis's spirit that guided the visions. At Dodona, where the oak leaves whispered, her voice was heard in the rustling wind. At Delphi, before Apollo claimed the oracle as his own, Themis herself had spoken through the priestesses, delivering words that shaped kings and empires. Her prophecies were rarely straightforward. She spoke in riddles, for truth unveiled too plainly often led to folly. To one king, she declared, "You shall conquer a great empire." He marched proudly into war, never realizing it was his own empire that would fall. To another, she said, "The beast you fear will not live to see another season." The king relaxed, believing his enemy slain, only to find that the beast was his own failing heart. Themis did not deceive, she revealed. But she revealed only as much as the law of balance allowed, for to no one's fate too clearly was to risk disrupting it, and even gods could not unravel the Moirai's threads. Yet her visions were not all warnings of doom. She also prophesied hope to a grieving mother. She whispered that her son, though fallen in battle, lived on in the songs of poets. To a city struck by famine, she foretold rains that soon returned life to the fields. Her prophecies were the balance of fear and comfort, of despair and renewal, the voice of the cosmos itself. The gods, too, relied on her counsel. Before great wars, before marriages, before the birth of divine children, they turned to Themis. Her wisdom guided the shaping of Olympus as surely as it guided the mortal world. She reminded even immortals that they were part of something greater. A web of destiny spun not by their hands, but by law eternal. But with each prophecy, Themis bore the weight of knowledge. She foresaw tragedies yet to come. The Trojan War, where gods themselves would bleed. The rise of new orders that would shake Olympus. The downfall of proud heroes. She could not change these visions, only speak them. And so, though her voice brought guidance, her heart carried sorrow. For to see the future is also to witness the suffering that must unfold. Still, she endured, for her role was not to turn fate, but to reveal it. Through her prophecies, both gods and mortals learned the lesson she had always taught, that law and destiny are one, and that to live in harmony with them is the greatest wisdom of all. Chapter 8: The Rise of Justice Among Mortals. When the gods shaped the world, they claimed dominion over storm, sea, and sky. Yet mortals, fragile and brief in their span of years, struggled to find their place beneath the heavens. They fought for food, land, and power, often destroying one another in chaos. To them, the world seemed vast and cruel, ruled by forces they could not control. But Themis, the Titaness of Law, looked upon them with compassion. Though she was bound to Olympus as counselor and prophetess, her influence reached the mortal realm. She saw that without guidance, mankind would perish not from storms or famine, but from their own greed and injustice. and so she set forth a divine task to teach mortals the principles of justice, balance, and order. The first laws of humanity. Themis did not descend in thunder or flame as Zeus often did, nor did she strike terror like Poseidon's storms. Instead, she came quietly, in visions and whispers, two shepherds watching the stars. She appeared in dreams, teaching them that justice was not vengeance, but balance. Two rulers who sought glory, she spoke through oracles, warning them that power without fairness led only to ruin. The first seeds of law took root in sacred gatherings. Leaders of tribes, once guided only by strength, began to hold councils where disputes were settled not by the sword, but by judgment. Themis inspired these councils, showing mortals that wisdom was greater than might. She placed in their hearts the knowledge that justice is the foundation of peace, and that without it, no kingdom could endure. It was said that when a ruler judged unfairly, storms rose, crops failed, and the people's cries echoed into the heavens. But when a ruler followed Themis's principles, protecting the weak, honoring oaths, and punishing with fairness, the land flourished, and even the gods looked kindly upon them. The birth of oaths and sacred order. Mortals soon realized that words, once spoken, held power. Under Themis's guidance, oaths became sacred. To break an oath was not merely to betray a man, but to wound the divine order itself. In time, sanctuaries were built where oaths were sworn before the gods, and Themis's unseen presence bound them. She taught that promises were threads woven into the fabric of law. Each broken vow frayed the tapestry of justice, while each honored oath strengthened it. This principle became the heart of civilization. Trust, upheld by law, was the root of all society. Through her influence, contracts, marriages, and alliances gained sanctity. To lie under oath was to invite doom, for Themis's unseen hand would tilt the scales against the oathbreaker, whether through loss, shame, or the ruin of their lineage. The council of mortals in one ancient city, where tribes had long been divided by endless blood feuds, Themis inspired a remarkable change. As the sun fell, a priestess entered a trance, her voice no longer her own. "Lay down the sword," she declared. "Come together as many and speak as one. Justice is not the rule of the strongest, but the harmony of all." The people were awed, for they recognized the voice of Themis speaking through the priestess, and so they formed what would later be remembered as the first mortal council of justice. Disputes were judged not by one, but by many who listened, debated, and sought balance. This practice spread from city to city, becoming the foundation of assemblies, senates, and courts that would shape human history for centuries to come. The struggle against corruption, but where justice rises, corruption always seeks to poison it. Not all mortals welcomed Themis's order. There were kings who twisted laws for their gain, priests who claimed false visions, and warriors who despised councils, preferring the rule of the blade. Themis foresaw this and wept, for she knew that no law could erase greed from the human heart. Yet she did not abandon them. Through dreams and omens, she revealed the downfall of the unjust. Tyrants who ignored the balance of law fell swiftly, their kingdoms crumbling as if cursed. Crops withered, armies deserted, and heirs betrayed them. To the people, these collapses were not chance, but the punishment of Themis. Her presence became a silent guardian, reminding mortals that though justice could be delayed, it could never be denied. The eternal flame of justice, Over generations, temples rose in her honor. At their altars, mortals prayed not for wealth or war, but for fairness. Her statues stood in marketplaces, holding scales to remind rulers and merchants alike that balance was sacred. Her name became synonymous with justice itself, not only in the hearts of mortals, but as a principle woven into the very structure of their societies. Though her work was slow, Themis rejoiced. For every tyrant who fell, a just ruler rose. For every broken oath, another was honored. Through her, mortals learned that justice was not merely divine law, but a gift they must protect and uphold themselves. And so, the Titaness of Divine Law did not simply watch over Olympus. She became the mother of mortal justice, the silent architect of civilization. Where there was fairness, her spirit thrived. Where there was order, her presence endured. And though kingdoms rose and fell, her influence remained eternal, as constant as the stars above. Chapter 9. Themis and the Moirai, weavers of fate. The halls of Olympus were quieter than usual. A veil of solemnity hung over the mountain as the gods gathered in hushed tones. Even Zeus, whose voice usually thundered across the heavens, spoke with a rare gravity. The topic was fate, an invisible thread that bound all gods and mortals alike. And in this discussion, one figure stood at the center: Themis, the Titaness of Divine Law. Though the Olympians ruled the cosmos after the Titanomachy, they too recognized that certain forces transcended their authority. Among them were the Moirai, the Fates, three ancient sisters who spun, measured, and cut the threads of life. Their decrees were final. Even Zeus himself bowed to them. Yet their mysterious nature unsettled many gods. Could destiny be tempered by justice? Could the harshness of fate be balanced with law? These were questions that only Themis dared to confront. The Moirai revealed Themis descended from her throne of counsel and traveled to the shadowed caverns where the Moirai dwelled. Within the cave, eternal night lingered, pierced only by the glimmer of silver threads stretching across an endless loom. The air hummed with the sound of weaving, a rhythm of existence itself. Clotho, the spinner, sat at one end, drawing fine strands of life from a spindle. Lachesis, the allotter, measured each with her rod, determining the length of every destiny. Atropos, the inflexible, waited at the final end, shears glinting in her hand, ready to sever life's thread. When Themis entered, the sisters raised their veiled faces. Unlike other gods, they did not fear or scorn her presence. They knew Themis, for her essence of divine law was closely entwined with their work. "Welcome, Themis," Clotho said, her voice like the first cry of a newborn. "You seek to weigh destiny against law," murmured Lachesis. "But beware, for none may soften the cut of my shears," warned Atropos. "Justice meets destiny." Themis bowed her head, not in submission, but in respect. "I do not come to alter your work, sisters," she said, her voice calm. "But I wish to ensure that what you weave flows with justice. Too often do mortals cry out, blaming fate for cruelty, when in truth they have strayed from law. Likewise, gods themselves sometimes invoke destiny to excuse their tyranny." The Fates exchanged glances. They were ancient, older than the Olympians, older even than the Titans, born perhaps from Nyx herself. Their neutrality was their power. Yet they were intrigued by Themis's words. "What is justice?" asked Lachesis. "If not another thread in the loom." "Justice is harmony," Themis replied firmly. "Without law, chaos swallows destiny. If a man is doomed, let him not say he was betrayed by the heavens, but by his own choices weighed against divine law. A test of balance to test her words. The Moirai presented Themis with a vision. A young mortal king, brave and wise, was destined to die before his city could flourish. The fates had already spun his thread short. Would you call this just? Asked Clotho. He has not yet ruled unjustly, Lachesis added. And yet my shears await him, Atropos concluded. Themis considered. To change fate outright was impossibly than folly. But she saw the deeper weave. His life may be brief, but justice can grant meaning to even the shortest reign. Let his laws endure where his breath cannot. In this way, destiny fulfills itself, and law grants it harmony. The fates nodded, impressed. They allowed the king's thread to remain short, but under Themis's counsel, his decrees outlived him. His people prospered for centuries under the laws he left behind, proving that justice could extend beyond fate's cut. The Council of Olympus. Returning to Olympus, Themis revealed her encounter with the Moirai. The gods listened intently. Some were unsettled. Ares scoffed at the idea of justice binding fate, for in his eyes, war was the only destiny. Yet Athena, wise daughter of Zeus, supported Themis. Without law, fate becomes cruelty. With justice, it becomes wisdom. Zeus, whose throne often placed him at odds with destiny, considered Themis's words carefully. Though he had once tried to outwit fate to prevent the rise of his son, he knew now that even he could not escape the Moirai's decree. Very well, he declared. Let it be known. The fates weave the threads, but Themis ensures their harmony. Thus, destiny and law shall walk together. Eternal harmony from that day forward. Whenever the fates spun a new destiny, Themis's voice echoed in their chamber. She did not command them, for none could, but her counsel resonated in the patterns of the loom. Through her, the cosmos found balance. Fate remained inevitable, but justice ensured that it carried meaning. And so, the bond between Themis and the Moirai became one of the deepest truths of Greek mythology. That destiny without law is blind, and law without destiny is empty. Together, they wove the fabric of existence, each thread uniting life, death, and the divine in eternal harmony. Chapter 10. Themis and the Rise of Human Kings. The age of the Olympians had brought stability to the heavens, but below, the mortal world teetered between chaos and order. Cities were beginning to rise from the dust. Kingdoms were forming along rivers and fertile valleys, yet strife was constant. Kings claimed crowns not by wisdom but by strength, and warlords carved borders with blood rather than law. From her seat on Olympus, Themis gazed down upon the mortal realm. Her heart ached at the cries of peasants oppressed by unjust rulers and the pride of kings who saw themselves as gods. She knew that if humankind was to endure, they would need more than strength, they would need justice. And it was her duty, as the Titaness of law, to plant its seed. The first council, Themis, descended to the mortal world, veiled in radiant light, appearing in dreams to chosen rulers. To one king, she said, "Do not see yourself as a master of men, but as their steward. You hold not their lives as possessions, but as trust. Rule with fairness, for tyranny is a fire that consumes even the throne." To another, she whispered, "Let your decrees be clear, that all may know them. Let them stand firm, unshaken by favor or bribe. For a king without law is a beast with a crown." Those who heeded her grew wise, and their kingdoms flourished. Fields yielded abundance, temples rose, and peace stretched across borders. Yet those who scorned her counsel soon found their reigns crumble. Rebellion rose against cruelty, famine followed greed, and unjust kings fell by their own arrogance. The birth of sacred law, among her greatest gifts to mortals, was the concept of sacred law. Unlike decrees that shifted with every new king, sacred law was eternal, rooted in justice itself. It spoke of hospitality, that strangers should be welcomed and not slaughtered. It declared that oaths made in the name of the gods must never be broken, and it bound rulers to their people, for kings who betrayed their subjects betrayed the gods themselves. Zeus, who often walked among men in disguise, marveled at the order Themis had sown. "Truly," he said, "these mortals thrive not by my thunder or Poseidon's seas, but by the laws you have given. You have given them a mirror of Olympus itself." Themis only smiled. She knew that law was the true foundation of civilization, the trial of the unjust king. But justice is often tested. One mortal king, proud and cruel, mocked Themis's words. He ruled with an iron fist, taking what he pleased, slaying his rivals, and silencing those who opposed him. When famine struck, he hoarded grain while his people starved. Themis appeared before him in a dream, warning him, "You break the balance of law. Retribution comes swiftly for those who mock justice." But he laughed, "I am king. The gods bow to no mortal, but mortals bow to me. What care I for your law, Titaness?" His arrogance sealed his fate. Soon, rebellion ignited among his people. His armies, starved and weary, deserted him. His throne was toppled, and he was cast into the dust, forgotten by history. Themis's decree had been fulfilled. No kingdom could stand long on injustice. Kings and the shadow of fate, though, Themis guided rulers. She knew that law alone could not shield them from destiny. Some kings, though just, met tragic ends. Wars, plagues, and betrayals claimed them. Yet their names endured in memory, sung in hymns and carved in stone. Their legacies proved that while fate might claim lives, law preserved honor. It was here that the work of Themis and the Moirai entwined once more. The fates cut threads, but Themis ensured those threads carried meaning. A short reign of justice shone brighter in history than a long reign of tyranny, and thus, even in death, mortal kings were measured not by power, but by justice. The foundation of civilization in time, mortals came to revere Themis as a goddess, not of Olympus, but of law itself. Shrines rose in her honor, where kings sought guidance before issuing decrees. Priests spoke her name when settling disputes, and judges carried her symbol, the scales of balances, a mark of their office. Themis had done what even the mightiest gods had not. She gave mortals a foundation to build upon. While Zeus's thunder inspired awe and Poseidon's waves carved coastlines, it was Themis's law that carved the soul of civilization. And so, the rise of human kings was not merely a story of crowns and thrones, but of law and justice, forever tied to the Titaness who had guided them. Chapter 11. Themis and the Prophecy of Olympus. The winds of Olympus carried unease. Though the gods ruled in splendor, shadows stirred on the horizon. Ambition festered, old grudges simmered, and whispers of rebellion spread among mortals and immortals alike. Zeus, seated on his golden throne, sought counsel not in the voices of war or strategy, but in the quiet wisdom of Themis, the the Titaness who had long been his advisor. For Themis held more than law, in her grasp she held prophecy. Her vision reached beyond the present, into the hidden currents of time, where the Moirai wove destinies yet to unfold. And what she foresaw would shape the future of Olympus forever. A vision in the flame. One night, Themis retreated to her sacred altar, where an eternal flame burned without smoke. She gazed into its heart, letting the fire reveal what lay hidden. There, she saw visions, storms breaking over Olympus, gods at war, and a monstrous figure rising from the earth to challenge Zeus himself. At its core stood a child born of Zeus's own line, destined to surpass him. Themis's heart weighed heavy. She knew well the danger of prophecy, for it was both a gift and a curse. To speak it aloud would set events in motion. To remain silent would invite chaos unprepared. The council of Themis at dawn, she approached Zeus. The king of the gods welcomed her gravely, for he had seen unease in her eyes. "Speak, Themis," Zeus said. "What shadow lies upon Olympus?" Themis's voice was calm, yet firm. "A trial approaches. From the earth shall rise a force that even you, Thunder Wielder, cannot face unprepared. And from your own seed shall be born one greater than you, one destined to rule where you cannot." Zeus's eyes darkened, for he remembered the fall of Cronus, his father, who had devoured his children to prevent such a fate. Yet fate had come for him all the same. "Shall I then suffer as my father suffered?" he demanded. Themis placed her hand upon his arm. "You are not Cronus. You need not devour nor destroy. You must learn to rule, not through fear, but through balance. Trust in law, not in might alone. If you heed this, Olympus shall endure." The warning ignored, but Zeus, though wise in many things, was proud. The thought of a child surpassing him gnawed at his spirit. He swore to outwit prophecy, to bend fate to his will. Yet Themis knew such defiance only strengthened destiny's grip. Still, she did not abandon him. She counseled the other Olympians, urging them to remain vigilant. To Athena, she whispered of wisdom as the true weapon of gods. To Apollo, she spoke of the balance of light and darkness. To Hera, she urged caution, for her jealousy could unravel Olympus itself. But many gods dismissed her warnings. "The Titans are broken," Ares boasted. "Who dares rise against us?" Poseidon laughed, shaking the seas. Even Hera turned a cold ear, suspicious of Themis's closeness with Zeus. Only Athena listened with true care, for she saw the weight in Themis's eyes and understood that prophecy was never spoken lightly. The Titaness and the Moirai, after her counsel, fell on deaf ears. Themis returned once more to the cavern of the Moirai. The three fates, as ever, wove their endless tapestry. She watched as Clotho spun, Lachesis measured, and Atropos's shears gleamed in the dim light. "Tell me," Themis said, her voice echoing in the chamber, "can Olympus escape this trial?" The Moirai answered as one. "No power escapes the thread. Not even law can unmake what is woven. But law can shape its meaning, guide its path. That is your gift, Themis." The Titaness bowed her head. She understood. She could not prevent what was to come, but she could prepare the gods to face it. The unfolding storm, her prophecy soon began to take form. From the depths of Gaia's womb, stirred by old hatred against the Olympians, rose Typhon, the monstrous storm giant who would shake heaven and earth in his fury. This was the trial Themis had seen, the last and greatest threat to Zeus's reign. And as for the child destined to surpass, Zeus Themis knew it was not yet time to reveal the full truth. For in her vision she had seen a lineage of heroes, both mortal and divine, born from the Olympians. One among them would rise not to destroy Olympus, but to lead it into a new age. Until that time, Themis would remain the quiet voice of balance, the unseen hand guiding both gods and mortals toward justice, even as fate unfolded around them. Chapter 12. The Legacy of Themis, Eternal Balance. When the dust of prophecy settled, and Olympus stood victorious after the storm of Typhon's wrath, the gods gathered to celebrate their triumph. Thunder had shaken the heavens, seas had boiled, and mountains had crumbled, but Olympus endured. At the heart of that endurance lay not only Zeus's lightning, but also Themis' unyielding counsel. For though strength won the battle, it was law, order, and balance that secured Olympus's survival. And Themis, silent yet steadfast, had been its guardian. The quiet triumph, unlike the Olympians, Themis did not boast of her role. She asked for no temples, demanded no sacrifices. Her presence was subtle, like the scales she bore always weighing, always balancing, never tipping too far. Mortals, however, felt her influence in every aspect of their lives. Where kings once ruled by whim, now they invoked her name when establishing codes. Where warriors once slaughtered without cause, they now honored truces and treaties sealed under divine law. Themis was not seen as a distant deity of thunder or sea, but as a constant, unseen guide, her justice flowing quietly like a river that nourishes the land. The passing of prophecy, as time passed, the gods grew restless. Zeus, though triumphant, never forgot the prophecy Themis had spoken, that one of his line would surpass him. Fear gnawed at him, just as it had gnawed at Cronus before him. But whenever his thoughts turned to paranoia, Themis reminded him, "Do not chain yourself with fear. Destiny will come whether you fight it or not. Rule with balance, and when the time comes, your throne will not crumble but transform." That is the difference between tyranny and justice. Her words kept him steady, preventing him from repeating the mistakes of his father. Though he did not always admit it, Zeus trusted Themis above all others. The eternal symbol in time, Themis became less a figure of flesh and spirit and more a symbol that transcended even the gods. Artists carved her image across Greece, a serene woman holding the scales of justice in one hand and a sword or staff in the other. Her eyes were often veiled, not out of blindness, but to show her impartiality, that law judges all equally, god and mortal alike. Themis became eternal in this way, not through shrines filled with riches, but through every act of justice mortals enacted in her name. Whenever a judge delivered a fair verdict, whenever a king ruled with fairness, whenever an oath was honored, Themis lived anew. Themis and the next age, though the age of Titans had passed, Themis's presence ensured their wisdom was not lost. She bridged the old and the new, weaving Titan law into Olympian order. Even when the Olympians quarreled and quarrel, they often did, was Themis's principles that restored balance. Her legacy was not only divine, but prophetic. 4 centuries later, philosophers and lawmakers of Greece would look back to her as the origin of justice itself. To them, she was not merely a goddess, but the embodiment of natural order, the voice of balance that spoke across ages, the eternal balance. And so, Themis's story did not end with battles or with crowns. It ended and yet continued with balance. She was the whisper behind justice, the foundation beneath kingdoms, the weight that steadied Olympus itself. Titans had fallen, gods had risen, empires would rise and collapse, but Themis endured, eternal as the scales she carried. For while strength may falter and fate may wound, law and justice remain. And in that eternal truth, Themis, Titaness of Divine Law, lives forever.